Welcome back. Joining me in the studio is Amir Rahimzadeh, an Iranian-born actor, writer and producer who has just moved to Melbourne from the UK. We're also joined by Dr. Matt Hardy, a senior lecturer at Middle Eastern Studies at Deakin University. Thank you both for coming on the show. Amir, tell us a bit about your career and why you became an actor.
Well, I was born in Iran and I moved to the UK as a child. I actually trained as a dentist initially, and I decided a few years later that I preferred to be an actor, so it kind of went from there.
Good story. And Matt, I understand you've written a journal article on some of the Orientalist stereotypes that are present in Game of Thrones. Could you give us a few examples?
Oh, in Game of Thrones, you've got a lot of examples. There's the Dornish civilization in the south there, which is really closely mirrored on the Moorish civilizations of Spain and Granada. And you've also got, of course, the Dothraki, who are Mongols. And, you know, just about everybody in the eastern continent of Game of Thrones is some sort of stereotype of the Middle East or Greater Asia.
Amir, as an actor, have you ever felt restricted in the industry or stereotyped in any of the roles you were auditioning for?
It's a tough question because I think you will automatically be cast in a certain role because of the way you look. So it's very hard to say whether there was any discrimination. These days, there are a lot more open roles. People try to represent society in the shows that they do. Things have improved, but I think when you say your agent sends your headshot to a casting director, they see that face. So they want that face to walk through the door and they want to hear that accent and so on. So yes, I have been typecast massively, but not just as an Iranian. I'm happy to say I've played Mediterranean roles, I've played Indian, any sort of thing that suits my face. So I've been quite lucky, and I haven't really turned anything down either, because I think you have to play those types to get your foot through the door. Hopefully, when you're more renowned and you can sort of pick and choose roles, then you can say, okay, I'm going to do Hamlet now, even though Hamlet isn't supposed to look like me. So that's, I think, where you have to kind of think, well, I'm going to be open to what's going to come my way, and then kind of pick and choose later on.
Matt, what effect does the reiteration of these stereotypes have on the audience?
I think when people watch a film about Iran, for example, say they watch Argo, they're expecting to see Iran, so they have a certain vision in their head. But when they watch a fantasy production like Game of Thrones, they're not thinking it's in the real world. But nevertheless, those same stereotypes come up again and again. So the problem is that even when you sort of think you're looking over the fence into a different world, you're still having those same real-world stereotypes reinforced in what you're seeing. And Game of Thrones is full of that sort of stuff. But so is a lot of fantasy literature, and even down to Disney's Aladdin, which is something we all plonk down our kids in front of when they're very young, and they still sort of passively absorb all those same stereotypes, even though they think they're looking at another world.
And Amir, what effect does this have on you as someone that was born in Iran to see the Middle East misrepresented on screen?
I think I've grown a bit of a thick skin over the years. You have to kind of put your own initial beliefs out of it. I think it helps, because otherwise you'll be reading into everything. And it is true that years ago there were different stereotypes on screen. Now we have this whole Middle Eastern thing going on. People want to write and make movies and television shows about the bad guy being the Middle Eastern guy. And yes, it's not a good thing, because obviously that's a very, very minority of people. Why doesn't somebody make a movie about the maniac who goes and shoots 20 college kids in America? Because I suppose that doesn't make interesting viewing at the moment. People want to see the radicalized Muslim, for example, who's gone and blown himself up. So you've got to step back from it and think, okay, am I constantly getting those roles, or is it really just society, and that's what is being thrown at the audiences? Fortunately, I've not had to do that many times personally. Maybe I'm being in a better position. I have played, for example, a hate preacher that was on the BBC, a guy who radicalizes a young man who goes to become, tries to be a suicide bomber. But I got given a role. It was the BBC. I couldn't say no. I did it. But if I did that 5 times, I'd probably start to think, come on, I can do something else now.
Matt, as a viewer, do you have any examples?
Of fantasy or of real world?
All of it. You're obviously the expert on fantasy parallels.
Look, in a lot of fantasy worlds, and we'll keep going back to Game of Thrones because most people are aware of it, they do use those same stereotypes, and even shopkeepers is a thing. You know, when you depict an Eastern world in fantasy, there's normally not shops, there'll be a bazaar full of tents and crafty merchants and who are all trying to cheat everybody who comes across them. So yeah, there are those stereotypes that we keep going back to, and you know, religion is another one. In Game of Thrones, the Eastern continent is the home of a fanatic religion that wants to spread all over the world, and you know, sacrifices people and involves dark and dangerous magic. Slavery is something that comes up a lot in fantasy worlds, and it's usually slavery that stems from the East. The Western environments in fantasy literature don't tend to have slavery, and Game of Thrones, of course, we know the liberation of slaves is a big plot point. What's really common though in all fantasy stuff is that the Eastern environment is just a place for the Western characters to progress across. There aren't any plots necessarily that are generated from the East. It's all about the Western protagonists being depicted in an exotic backdrop.
Would you say there are any differences between being cast in the UK or Hollywood or even here? How is the industry different from England to Melbourne, say?
I think it's quite similar. I mean, I've not had a great deal of experience in Australia just yet. I mean, I think any society will, if it's trying to be truthful, has got to depict what's around it. So, you know, if 10% of the population are, you know, say, East Asian, then let's see them on screen. I think things have opened up a lot, but there's still that fascination with making those movies, isn't it? You know, they want to. I mean, I've had 2 or 3 roles now where I've been the sort of bad Iranian guy, if you like. Not bad as in I've gone around shooting people, but I've been a suited guy in an office doing a job that I think I should do as a government post, for example, and then sent an innocent man to the gallows. But that does happen. And Hollywood will depict that, and so will Britain, I think. So there's probably not a great deal of difference. It's only because the audiences want to see that, that it exists.
There is a lot of connection between what films come out of Hollywood and who gets depicted as the bad people. And as you go through the years, you see sometimes it's Iranians, sometimes it's Libyans, sometimes it's Islamic State fanatics. It does change depending on what's going on in the news at the time. There was a period, I think in the 80s, when South Africans became like the bad guys in Hollywood films because, you know, everybody was fully anti-apartheid at the time. So popular culture will always reflect current politics as well. And it's not just movies, it's not just TV, it's video games and all those other forms of media as well.
We're unfortunately running out of time and are going to have to go to a break, but thank you both so much for coming on and sharing your experiences and stories. It was great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stick around. After the break, we're sharing a few of our favourite travel stories that have been sent in by viewers.